I mean, I started playing the drums. That was my first instrument. And then I moved to playing music with computers because I wanted to be able to do everything, you know, and not just the drumming bit. Needed to hear some more solo drumming records at the time or something. And I started with making stuff with samples of other people's music. And it wasn't till when I was living in Japan, I bought a Roland SH-101, really cheap still at the time then. And I must have heard somewhere that they used it on Boards of Canada record, which I was super obsessed with at that time. And that was really my introduction to synthesizers. I think it was probably just not like when Keith Fullerton Whitman had started doing some of his had just switched to the modular and did some stuff, and I was like, oh, that sounds curious. And then I was visiting Lawrence English, who had a small Doepfer A100 system. When we made the record with Tsuchiko Noriko. And then I went home and started getting like one module at a time. I try to start to begin really simply, and you see what one part of it can do. In the same way that, you know, when I first got my own synthesizer, I started with one thing. And I still do it now, both when approaching an instrument like this or even parts of my own synthesizers at home. Is I start with one thing, kind of see what it does, particularly if there's anything kind of that feels like it's a bit weird or idiosyncratic that it does. And can that be exploited for some kind of musical end? And then, you know, go from there, see how they interact. Sometimes it happens really quickly because it's quite simple, and other times it'll be years worth of learning to understand really, particularly say on the Surge synthesizer because it's so programmable. There's still modules that I keep forgetting how, I know it does this thing, now which way is it that I'm supposed to put it together so it does that? And the other thing is that, you know, I just press record right from the beginning, and if something nice comes up, it's totally okay that I didn't mean for that to happen. It's all still valid and something that I'd be happy to use.
I wanted to have this new system in our studios at the GRM. We had, in the early 60s, we had a huge modular synth system in the studio where we have up to 24 different kind of modules with a sequencer, analog sequencer. Later we had the small system called Mini Synthesizer 54, which was the latest version of the modules that we had at the GRM. And some artists starting in the 2000s were able to use it again because we repaired it, and it was really interesting for them to use the old system, the mini system. But it was a little bit limited. We have only 13 modules, and I wanted to have the same experience that they had with a huge system. So I built this new synth with the analogy of the old system. We have now up to 40 modules, different modules, with the same concept that we developed in the 60s. So with the same, almost same sonic characteristic, electronic characteristics.
It's a real pleasure to get to work with it and play it. It's not at all easy to play, in the sense that you know, there was a really, you can imagine at the time it was made, it was next level, and it still sounds totally amazing.
I have decided in this version to have 16 analog oscillators, sine wave oscillators, and more universal oscillators with different kind of wave shape, so square, triangle, and sine wave, and with different envelope generators, VCA, and ring modulators.
The sine wave oscillators sound incredible. The universal oscillator, particularly, I'm a big fan of the sound of the sync. You know, it sounds totally great, but it's really difficult to control, even more so than other more contemporary synthesizers. You know, there isn't a sequencer or different things that might make it, you know, easier to repeat things.
Basically, it's really exactly close to this old system where the matrix, the pin matrix, like in the Synthi, EMS Synthi, is now replaced with a matrix modular mixer instead. So we can patch everything with a cable instead of matrix, and it's maybe a bit easier to use, where you don't have to remember which row you use on the pin matrix. You just need to take a cable and connect the output directly to the input of a module that you want to control, or mix, or use.
The sine wave oscillators, you know, they have this beautiful thing where you change the frequency, and you can only change the frequency by hand. And you change the frequency by hand and the sound disappears. And then springs back at the next frequency, which I really enjoy, but then it's like, how do I get it exactly in tune? So, which is fine, you just give up on the idea of getting it exactly in tune, and you practice little flicks of the wrist to jump between different frequencies, and then you take out the happy kind of accidents of the which kind of intervals and stuff that you hit, because the actual sound of it jumping between those tones is wonderful. You know, it feels like, yeah, it's blossoming.